It's time to take a ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive with our co-hosts Alan Saunders and Zachary Smith.
Welcome into an episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Alan Saunders. We are back, and so is Nick Farabaugh back on the channel. What's going on, Nick?
What's going on, guys? What's going on? I'm becoming like a semi-regular here leading up to the draft, which is, in my opinion, outside of the actual season, my favorite time of year.
1 week from today, the 2024 NFL Draft. All this stuff that we are hearing, everything that's being said, everything that we want to speculate on, it's all going to come to fruition, as we all know. 100% accuracy here at Steelers Now, everything that we have said. But all this smoke, maybe, that comes within the last week or so. Nick and I were talking before we started recording, and we were just saying how funny it is, like the last week really leading up to the draft, everything that's being thrown out there, just people throwing stuff at the wall just to be different, it seems like. But yeah, excited for it. Obviously, my favorite time of the season. I'm not sure if Derek Bell has slept in the last 80 plus hours, so that's good. Alan, how about you? How are we doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm good. I'm bored. I need stuff to happen. I'm ready. Yeah. I'm ready to go. Like I love the covering of the draft. This talking about stuff gets me, man. This is like the time of year where people start to get jumpy and they start to say dumb stuff, and I'm not a fan of the dumb stuff. So yeah, be careful of the rumors you read this week. People are bored.
I feel like it's really got it got worse when, there was a point in time where the blue check marks meant something. You weren't just purchasing blue check marks. Now, I think there's still some people that can't separate that, and they just think everybody that has a blue check mark is still credible.
And I think the guy that the John Frescella guy,
yeah,
like who doesn't even may or may not even actually be a real human being. I don't know.
So I googled him. And I was talking about this with Jarrett Bailey because I was on his show Sunday, and he doesn't have an article listed under him since August of 2023. So somebody that writes about football did not have an entire article, one entire football season without an article.
I wouldn't trust that guy's sources if he told me what he was cooking for dinner. Like I would want to see it on the plate before I believed him. That's yeah. Stop giving attention to these clowns. This, it's so hard to do this job. And look, there are people that do this job and they don't necessarily do it that well. But I see those people out there busting their butts every day. And you know what? Like, give the people that are actually doing the work some credit and not clowns like that guy. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, and another thing too, like I mentioned with like the blue checkmark stuff, AI, like how far we've come with AI, like entire accounts basically built off AI, which is pretty insane to think about. But like I've seen them. If you look in the replies of like any of the big people, Schefter, Rap Sheet, any of those people this time of year, you see like AI accounts fully that are just replying. It's like keywords that they zone in on, and you go to their page and it's all.
I get them all the time.
Yeah, insane stuff. But anyways, we are not here to talk about that as much as this may surprise you. That's how I'm going to start replying to people. I do say podcast bio sometimes, but specifically I'll have to start saying afternoon drive in bio. Alan, Nick, a position that we've kind of touched on, but I'd like to dive into a little bit more today is slot corner. Another position. You look at the Steelers roster right now. If they had to play a football game tomorrow, who in the world is lining up in that position? I really like the draft class, though, in terms of what is there. And we've also talked maybe a little bit about, is this a position where they could dip into, post-draft free agency? But I want to start with the draft, the slot corner options that this team has.
Who is the slot? Like, if they had to play right now,
Josiah Scott.
Yeah.
Or maybe Darius Rush moving inside because he did a little bit of it last year on the dime. Luke Barku. Luke Barku's played some slot. He's there.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really an obvious answer to that right now of who the slot would be. They don't really have a lot of slot-capable nickels either. Elliott's done a little bit of it. Minka's done some of it, but I think the plan for them is pretty clearly to put them back in true safety roles. So I don't think it's them. I mean, they do have.
I mean, I guess that's the right answer, right? If they had to play right now, the nickel would be the 3 safeties, right?
Yes.
There is no nickel corner.
Yeah, I guess it would be. They do have some veteran nickel capable players that they did at least sign during their initial wave, like Scott. Thomas Graham also is a guy that can do that, but these are low roster players. Barku too, who honestly had a pretty good camp last year, and I think they might have a little bit of something with Luke Barku. I'm kind of like interested to see what he does in camp, but like nothing that you are going to rely upon heading into a game right now. So it's a need for them. I also think it's one of the needs that they can particularly maybe address by signing someone off the street. There's a few guys.
Well, last year's options are still there. Patrick Peterson and Shannon Sullivan, if they want them, still see Elijah Riley also, all still free agents, guys that were most of that depth that they had at that position last year.
Yeah, so there are options for them. And there's other slot capable guys out there as well. But this is a pretty good draft for slot corners. I think outside corners, it gets a little thinner the way you go down. It's more project guys that probably aren't going to play right away. But the slot corner depth probably goes all the way down to pick 98, maybe even 119 for guys that can play right away. It's a very nice slot corner draft.
Where do you see, if at all, a cluster of value at this position, or maybe compared to the Steelers' needs? Like we said, there are other free agent options, unlike, say, center, where there's just nobody out there to play. Like they're screwed if they don't draft one. It does seem like that's a position, based on who's available in free agency still, that they can afford to wait on. And it also seems to me like the slot options, while there are guys in the first round that would be good slot corners, starting with Terry and Arnold probably at the very top of the draft, I think there are guys way into the fourth round that can be like realistic year one guys, and even beyond that, like guys that are barely going to get drafted that I think are players that you could latch onto as future starters at the position. So I don't see the Steelers in a rush to necessarily address this need when it comes to draft day.
Yeah, but I do think the cluster of guys they have visited is really concentrated around 51 and then 84, 98. So that late day 2 area. I think 51, we're probably talking about guys like Max Melton and Mike Sanders still up there. Both of these guys are ready-made slots. They will play day one. Different players, too. Sanders still is a Mike Hilton clone that is a blitz-heavy guy, great run defender, freak athlete, still has working coverage. Max Melton is a phenomenal coverage defender. And what I like about Melton's game specifically is inside and outside versatility. So I love that double kind of fill a void, right? Because they could use outside corner depth too, even if they have some intriguing pieces out there with Trice and Rush and those guys. But Melton having that ability to do that also allows them to do a lot of things. But then you look, 84 through 98. I mean, we're talking about, Andrew Phillips in that kind of area. I'm a big fan of Renardo Green in that area. I think he's awesome in there. I just think there's a nice cluster of corners where you're going, man, Renardo Green is probably going to be drafted at the very back end of the top 100. And we're talking about a guy that might make the all-rookie team, in my opinion. Like, that's the type of players we're going to be able to find here in the slot corner value. So it is a deep draft. And then you even go later, kind of the guys you were talking about, Alan, where, local connections really, both MJ Devonshire and Daquan Hardy, in my opinion, have options here and can be players. Elijah Jones out of Boston College is a really good player.
I think he might be more of an outside guy, but yeah, like he's fast.
He can play
Absolutely.
the slot. He can play the slot, I mean, listen, we're even talking, down the board in that third round tier that I was kind of talking, I talked about Andrew Phillips. I do think that you can see guys, like Renardo Green go a little earlier, but you have Kamari Lassiter that might be in the slot. Ennis Rakestraw can definitely play in the slot. There's just a lot of talent in the slot draft all the way down. Jerry and Jones can probably play in the slot. I think it's just a really good class, man.
Yeah, Jarvis Brownlee. Like, there are very few after the first round. And in fact, even the first round guys are all pretty versatile. This class does not have a ton of the Joey Porter Juniors, right? Where it's just like it's a big, tall, long, fast guy that you're absolutely going to want to play outside. There are a couple of those guys, Kyrie Jackson, Cam Hart, come to mind as like that sort of prototypical, big, tall Kool-Aid. McKinstry is probably purely an outside guy. But outside of that, it feels like almost every guy on the board. TJ Tampa can play inside. Abrams Drain can probably play inside. Jarvis Brownlee can definitely play inside. And so it feels like almost every guy, Dwight McLaughlin, even though he's a big dude, could probably play inside a little bit because he's quick. There's a lot of different kinds of body styles, but it feels like almost every corner in this entire draft could be an option to play on the inside.
Yeah, there's just a lot of guys in that room and different types of players. Like Saunders, still we talked about as a run down guy. Melton can be a 3-down guy. Renardo Green can play outside safety or the slot. I mean, that's a guy that can do anything. Basically, if you don't get DeJean early, Green can do all the stuff he can in terms of versatility. He can do all of that. So I love the difference of style and kind of what you have and great athletic kind of ability in that group too, right? There's not a lot of bad athletes in the guys the Steelers have brought in, specifically, Phillips, Saunders still there at this pro day. Green is a really good athlete too. I just look at the corner position that they had brought in. Nate Wiggins obviously is a phenomenal athlete as well. They've just brought in a lot of guys that are really athletic at that position. And I think that's what they're looking for. And I think they'll find it. And they can find it in different types of guys. MJ and Daquan and Beanie Bishop, too, who I didn't mention earlier, are all versatile.
Beanie Bishop does one thing really well, and it's intercept the football, which is a good one thing to be good at.
Yes. he's a feisty dude, like, can be a really good, like, dog mentality is the name of the game with him. He wears the chip on his shoulder. And he's definitely undersized, but man, he can be a feisty player. So they just have a lot of options and a lot of good athletes at that position that they can.
There are
really
also a ton of safeties that have played in the slot too.
Yeah,
like bigger guys. But like I think Javon Bullard could play in the slot. I know Tyke Smith can play in the slot. Sione Vaki, maybe, I don't know. Like he probably could do it. There's a couple
Taylor
other
Demerson?
Yeah, exactly. Taylor Demerson. He is a slot. I think he is Mike Hilton. Like that's what you're getting there. So I think there's certainly guys all over this class that you can fit. I don't think they need to rush. Honestly, like we talked about linebackers, Smitty, like is it crazy to think they could go linebacker before they get a slot corner just because like there are so few linebackers? The ones that I've talked to are the top of the class. Cornerback, I feel confident waiting until the 4th round and maybe later.
Earlier than linebacker. I mean, I can see it. I do kind of have a hard time seeing them get out of the first 5 picks without a corner. I don't think that they're getting out of 119 without one. So I think they can wait. I don't think they will. I don't know what the 5th position. So what you think that they would be center, receiver, tackle, linebacker, D line, and that would knock corner into the 6th. I mean, I guess that can happen. Wouldn't be shocking if it did, just because they have 3 local guys that are all probably going to go in the 6th round with Hardy.
And I just think I think if you were looking at if you're looking at your board as the Steelers and saying, okay, we're not going to get all of these, which one do we want to not get? To me, the clear answer is slot corner. Like you can go find, like we mentioned the Steelers free agents, but like there are lots of free agent slot corners still on the market besides the Steelers' own guys that they can go find. Like it is not a picked over market at all. There are plenty of guys out there. And so I think that's the one. If you're going to risk not getting one, to me, that's clearly the one to risk not getting.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't think they are going to wait for it. I don't really understand the linebacker fascination. I really don't. I just don't get it. I get they need one for the future, but if you're going to look at the linebacker for the future, why are we not looking at guard like as a bigger need? I just similar situation to me with both positions.
Unless
Maybe
unless
that's
it's
their
Cole
intent.
Holcomb injury concern.
Yeah, I mean that could
That's
be it. But
the
like
one
Mark
mod.
Robinson, I thought Mark Robinson, in his final 2 or 3 games probably played the best 2 or 3 game stretch he's played. And so I don't think he's like a savant or is like a key factor, but if I need Mark Robinson to be a 2 down bowling ball, like I think he can do it now. Like I think he showed he could. So I think the linebacker interest is like they're just like partially scarred from what happened to the linebacker position last year, where they had 3 starters, and really it just got obviously it became very dire down the stretch. So I don't blame them for it, but Queen, E-Rob, and Cole Holcomb is a really good trio as long as Holcomb is healthy. I guess we'll see. From everything I know, Holcomb's recovery seems to be on track. I don't know if that means he'll be ready for week 1, but I think he will be. If that isn't true, I mean, they can go get one. I think there's names out there that they can get, but it would have to be a very specific set of names. Cedric Gray, Trevin Wallace.
There are just very few of them, right? That's what we talked
Yeah.
about yesterday. Is it like, can you identify one in every round?
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's kind of it. Like there's 1 or 2 guys. I think it's very interesting, the slot corner thing. And I also, they've been linked to the corners in the first round. They hosted Wiggins at the pro day for dinner. They Arnold and Kool-Aid and Cooper DeJean. They've talked to all these guys. I just am, really not sure that that's what the Steelers are going to want to do at the position, because I think they like Corey Trice and Darius Rush enough to not want to just block those guys completely and say, okay, we drafted Porter, we drafted another guy with the first. Here's our 2 starting outside guys. And those are guys that you probably don't feel as good about moving to the inside. They are that tall, long, fast combo that you want as an outside corner. So I just am a little skeptical they're going to want to use a first round pick and sort of keep those 2 guys that they like a good bit from having a path to starting.
I'm not sure first round pick, but third round pick. I think I can see it. I mean, they're not indebted to Dante Jackson past this year either, which I think factors into it. And listen, Trice and Rush are going to be competing for the James Pierre spot on the roster. He's gone. So I mean, if I'm sitting here right now, both those guys probably are making the roster.
Oh, I think 100%.
Yeah. So like, yeah, they could be part of it. I mean, listen, if Trice has an OTH training camp and carries that into a preseason next year, he could legitimately play. He was really good last year. I just want to see it in games. But he was, and remember
when
absolutely
have Joey's season last year, this season. Now, not maybe to the point where he's falling around number 1 wide receivers, but start out as a dime corner and then work his way up and roll and eventually pass Dante Jackson on the depth chart. Absolutely, that's easy to see happening.
Yeah, I mean, listen, when Alan, you and I were sitting there at training camp, and Joey had a tougher time in training
at
camp.
OTAs. Corey Trice was better than Joey Porter Jr. last year.
He was
100%. Wasn't really close.
And Joey just ended up he's just such a quick learner that he just ascended so quickly. But Corey Trice looked like a guy that would have played last year. And so I don't think they can bet on Corey Trice, but I think they do need to keep the door open for
I just don't think exactly. Just keep it as a chance. Like, you got Jackson. You certainly have a fallback if he turns out not to be the guy for this season. But I don't think they want to make a move that's going to lock down that position long term the way like a Terrion Arnold probably would.
Yeah, but I think that doesn't rule out Melton, Sanders still.
No, and all those guys are slots. So then like it's fine. You're just drafting the new Cam Sutton or the new Mike Hilton, right? That's what you're doing there.
Yeah, and I listen.
Actual Cam Sutton is available. Also, I don't know if the Steelers would want to go down that road, but we should probably throw that out there too.
K1 Williams.
K1 Williams is a perfect slot.
I mean, could be a good slot for them if they wanted to. Yeah, it's a very easily you could fix that in free agency right on draft day if you really wanted to. It just depends.
That's what they did last year. They didn't get one, and they signed Shannon Sullivan during the draft.
Yes, they did. And so it could happen again. I look at slot and say that's the most easily fixable, but I look at the value too at 51. I mean, Sanders still's close. Sanders still and Melton are close to BPA 51. Like they are. Maybe not the need of a receiver, for example, but if you're going, with BPA, I mean, they're there in a trade back scenario as well. I think it becomes very attractive. Cooper DeJean does, and if you trade back. So I mean, I don't know exactly where it's going to fall. I think this could be a type of pick that could go anywhere from late in a trade back, but I still think that third round. I think one of those picks, 84 or 98, is probably where we see this addressed. Should also say, assistant defensive backs coach Anthony Midget did coach Renardo Green and Jerry Jones, both of those FSU corners. So there's a connection there, even though they haven't visited Pittsburgh. There's a connection there with some insight if they end up drafting one of them.
Yeah, I like both of those guys in the fourth round. I don't know if Renardo Green gets there. I think he's probably more 98, but I really like Jerry Jones in the fourth round.
I do too. Yeah, I would take Green on day two. I really
I think Green is more 98, but Jerry Jones at 119, I think it'd be a very nice pick for him. So we kind of started to talk about the value of these positions, and there was an interesting discussion. I guess it kind of got started with Dane Brugler yesterday. Was on the PFF NFL podcast and talked about this at the tackle position. And then I think Todd McShay sort of picked it up today, was talking about tackle and comparing it to wide receiver and like where there is significant cutoffs in those respective classes. Because people are talking a lot about, oh, it's a very deep tackle class and oh, it's a very deep wide receiver class. And I think both those sentences can be true, but it doesn't mean that you're just going to get a quality player for the position if you draft one anywhere in this board. I think there are very clear sort of groupings of talent to navigate, and I think there's big differences between the kind of player you're going to get if you go tackle or wide receiver in a different space. I thought it was an interesting conversation. Wanted to kind of get your takes on it as well. But the one thing that stood out for me is Dane Brugler said to me point blank is like, if you want to tackle, get one in the first round, because this group of tackles, while this tackle class is deep in the first round, it's not necessarily deep after that. There's not just an abundance of overflowing day 2 and day 3 tackles where you can just plug and play guys as year 1 starters, or even as projectable. Like, I think there have been draft classes with more projectable day 3 tackles than this one. It just happens to be that there's 8 guys that could get taken in the first round, 7 guys that could get taken in the first round, depending on how you classify Graham Barton. But so that's the big thing. And so if you're not getting a tackle in the first round, is it really a deep tackle class? Well, not to you, because you missed the depth. And I think that's an important part of this conversation. Kind of wanted to get your take on that, both of you guys, really. But I know Smitty's having some connectivity issues today, so I don't know if he's with us or not.
I'm here if you guys can hear me right now, but this is very upsetting on mine. So real quick, okay, let me say my thoughts while I am able to talk on this podcast. Just going through here and looking at the tackles. I mean, I'm not even a guy that's necessarily high on Tyler Guyton. So like for me, the drop off is probably after Latham or Mims, depending on which one you have higher. Although I do like Kingsley Suamataia and Jordan Morgan, but not necessarily as guys to start day 1. So even I would say there's probably 5 or 6 guys I feel like comfortable with as round 1 guys.
Yeah. Man, I have some questions about the round 1 guys too. I still think there's a real chance Talise Fuaga is a guard. I just do.
That's fair.
Hanu, I think, is probably a tackle, but could maybe be one. But I mean, you're talking about even that next tier. I think there's a sizable gap between Amarius Mims and Tyler Guyton. I really do.
Yeah, I agree.
I think Guyton is so raw, and Mims isn't as raw as he is inexperienced.
Yeah, I think you can kind of put them in the same category, but for very different reasons, right? It's like these are both guys that I think are like compared to the top 5 guys. I think those 2 guys have a significantly greater risk involved in drafting them, right? But the reason for the risk is different, right? Tyler Guyton's tape is kind of a mess, and even though he's a gigantic, really good athlete, you're gonna have a lot of work to do. And Amarius Mims' tape is just like a 45 instead of an LP. It's
Yeah.
there's just not enough of it there, right? To feel confident that you just didn't watch the 6 best games that guy's ever going to play and you've been hoodwinked. And so, but after that, man, I don't know. There are second round tackles. There are day 3 tackles. Probably another 6 of them. But
Mac and Salvis hype, stand up.
It's a very different group. Like, you're not getting anywhere near the look. I think there are some of these guys that are interesting, like Kieran Amagaji from Yale, and I think Roger Rosengarten from Washington is very interesting. But like, to me, these look like typical day 2 tackles. Like, Patrick Paul is going to probably get taken on day 2, and like, compare him to Max Starks. He's like every gigantic tackle with like big question marks about his movement, and that guy gets drafted on day 2 every year. The difference to me is the presence of guys like J.C. Latham, Amarius Mims, Troy Fautanu in the second half of the first round. That's where the depth shows up. That's rare. Guys that good don't usually fall there. To me, all the day 2 tackles look like day 2 tackles.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, listen, for me with Guyton, I like Sua Matea better. I like him a lot. I like him better personally. I think you can argue for Jordan Morgan over him too. Morgan is like, even just extending the presence, not just Fautanu and Mims. I mean, to have the presence of high-end guys like Guyton, Sua Matea, and Morgan, 1, 2, 3 at the very back end too. You can really classify it into 3, 4 tiers of these tackles where, dude, that top 10, like Jordan Morgan is not a typical day 2 tackle. Kingsley Sua-Matea is not a typical day 2 tackle. Neither is Tyler Guyton. Tyler Guyton in last year's draft probably goes, top 25, just because
he's very much Broderick Jones. I mean, they're like not different kinds of players, but like in terms of you're taking a risk on a guy with athleticism that has work to do. Like, it's very much the same idea, and he might go 30 instead of 14.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think there are intriguing guys down the board. I think Rosengarten is pretty polished for a day 2 tackle. I think Blake Fisher has some intriguing athletic tools, and I think is further along than you would think for a guy that's probably going to be available in the middle 3rd round. But I also think you kind of have those guys every year where, okay, there's a little polish on them. I think, Gonsalves is a really of those day 2 tackles. I think Fisher and Gonsalves really piqued my interest. Fisher's tape is really all over the place. Gonsalves, I really do believe he would have been a second round pick if he had been healthy all year. I mean, he is really good.
Should he have gone back? I know this is more of a pick conversation, but do you think he should have gone back?
No.
Just because of how deep this tackle class is? Like, I think he could end up being like tackle 4 or 5 next year.
Maybe, but I think he'll slip into day 2 here, and he'll have a solid landing spot too. He's going to be what? I mean, how old is Mac Gonsalves at this point, man? Is he almost 24?
I think he's 23.
He's 23. So next year he would have been 24 coming out. I mean, really up to him. But I do really think he is like a great athletic guy, pass pro before run, but can do both. Future star.
Played some guard, and I think 330 probably big enough. Like, he could maybe even put on a little bit more weight. He could play guard if a team doesn't want him a tackle, or perfect guy to like draft as your swing backup this year, and then see if you can grow him into something. That's for sure.
Listen, I think there's some other interesting guys in the 4th that could maybe develop into starter upsides. Like Javon Foster, I think has some upside that could be unlocked in his game. I really like
Walter Rouse, who I wasn't watching, but then started watching because you told me about him. Okay, but if we have this line at tackle where we say, okay, here's where the depth actually shows up, and then after that, it's just these are just typical. Is that like everyone keeps saying this is a deep wide receiver class, and it is, and there are guys that are going to go like deep, like where does that depth show up for wide receiver the way it does for tackle? And for me, it's interesting because it's kind of not in the first round. Like, there's 3 guys that are going to go in the top 10 that look like all-star wide receiver, like perfectly built. everybody outside of those top 3 has some kind of major question mark. And while there are more of those guys than usual, like there are a lot of day 2 wide receivers with question marks that might turn out to be great, but might not be. To me, the value cluster for wide receiver is actually at the end of day 2, right? Because there's going to be guys that are still going to be available at the end of the day 2 that would be more normally like early second round picks. And instead you're looking at getting guys that, in 100, where to me, that's where it is. It's not in the first round of wide receiver is actually thinner than we've seen in some recent classes.
I think I do think the value cluster, there's 2 value clusters for receiver. I think one of them is right around the 51st overall pick, actually.
Yeah, I
where
agree.
you get guys like Pearsall and Leggett and Polk and McMillan that are maybe going to be there. And maybe you get a guy like
Franklin, right. Yeah, maybe a Xavier Worthy, right. Like that.
Maybe someone slips, right? That is just like, oh my goodness, this guy's here. What's going on? So like there could be that guy, but that's a cluster. And then I think you talk about that, you really get after Polk and Pearsall. And after that, to me, then you go down to round 3, where you get Corley and Roman Wilson and Johnny Wilson, and probably Jermaine Burton's in that bucket just because of the off-field questions.
Javon Baker, Brendan Rice.
Yeah, Javon Baker. And then you even go to the 4th round, where the early 4th will be, you got guys probably that are going to be pretty good players like Malik Washington and Luke McCaffrey.
Jamari Thrash, Anais Smith, Jacob Cowing, like Taj Washington. It's that to me is the like what stands out to me about this wide receiver class is that like Jamari Thrash and Johnny Wilson, okay, very different kinds of players. Jacob Cowing too, and Luke McCaffrey, all very different kinds of players. But they're all guys where you're like, oh, this guy's enormous. This guy was super productive college player. This guy is really fast, that's capable. This guy has incredible NFL bloodlines and has untapped potential after spending 2 years in the position. Like these are all interesting guys I would really want to get my hands on that are going to be 4th round picks. If you look at like the wide receivers in the 4th round, look at last year's 4th round wide receivers. It's like Xavier Hutchinson and Parker Washington. And Andre Yoshivas turned into a good player, and Puka Nacua was down there. But like, I don't know. I don't have the same feeling about that. I didn't have the same feeling about that part of the draft class last year that I do this year.
Yeah. I mean, also like, going back to the slot corner idea, if they let it go, I mean, we could easily see a pick at 51 and a pick at 119 for these receivers. I guess they did it in 22, doubling up on Pickens and Austin, 2 completely different types of receivers. Who's to say they don't go, I don't know, let's just say they go Leggett at 51 and come back at 119 with Thrash or something like that. That is like different receivers, different types. Would give him more upside.
Or the other way, get Ricky Pearsall and then come back with Johnny Wilson.
Yeah, like that could happen, right? So I think that's possibly too. Like it has depth where we are talking about the double up on receiver as being really good value for them, and they need to. So it makes sense. So that's where the cluster for receiver is. It really is, at 51, and then that 98 to 119 band. I don't think it's much 84. I think at 84, it's actually a little tough sometimes when you see who's there. It might be, Tez Walker or someone like that, who personally I'm just not as high on.
That's like a Burton. Burton is there a lot. And, his tape is great. It's all about how much you trust the off the field stuff.
Yeah, it really is. But, 98 to 119, there's just a nice cluster of players there that are far better than that position. But I also feel the same way about corner. I just think the value clusters there are, corner and receiver at those 2 spots, specifically between 98 and 119. I think there's nice value there. Conversely, I think the tackle and the day 2 tackle value is 84. So, like, if I'm looking at like where the value is going to be on these guys, if we're talking positions of need, like 51 to me, the value at 51 is going to be probably at receiver and corner. The value at 84 is probably going to be at tackle or center. And the value at 98 and 119 is probably going to be a corner receiver again. And so, when we're talking about the D line is just value. as well throughout that third round.
Fourth round is a good place for D-line too. There's a lot of both the third round picks and the fourth round pick. There's a lot of D-line.
I agree. But
I think to me, what it really says to me is if you really want to navigate this draft class well, and you want to find those pockets, you got to take a tackle in the first round if you're a tackle needy team. This is what Dane Brugler said. And if you need a tackle, go get one in the first round. And the thing that is interesting to me is we're sitting here talking about the Steelers at 20, and there's going to be one of those guys there. I wonder how many teams that are not in the first round, or not, like Washington, for example, really needs a tackle. They're going to take a quarterback. They have 2 second-round picks. Are they going to move up? Are other teams going to see this and try to get into that? I think that's one of the interesting things to watch on draft day, because it's a historic first round in terms of tackles for me. I'm not sure the rest of the draft class is exceptional at that position.
I would agree. I think it's an exceptional top for offensive line, man. It just is.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
you don't have 3 centers like Barton.
There's going to be 15 offensive linemen taken in the first 2 rounds. That's just crazy.
There might be more than that. I mean, I'm not even kidding. Dude, look at the guard. Look at the guard board too. That
BB and Haynes, I was counting in there. Also, Christian Haynes is someone that we haven't talked about in this podcast at all, because everyone has him listed as a guard. He took center reps at the Senior Bowl. Thought he looked fine doing it. I don't know. As a backup plan, not crazy if Frazier's gone and they want to draft a center at 51.
Duke Manyweather also said Cooper Beebe has been taking center reps.
And Cooper Beebe has some length issues with just whether he's going to be long enough to be a guard. So maybe center's in the cards for him anyway. And Don McPuney's in there too. He took center reps at the Senior Bowl. They didn't talk to any of those guys, so it's hard for me to see that happening. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's just such a deep draft in terms of the top. The top is so deep. The top 50 for these linemen are just insanely deep. And so
I think a draft run by Andy Weidel is going to pick offensive linemen early and often. I think we might see back-to-back.
Depends. I don't know what tackle they would pick at 51. I just don't think the value is there.
No,
they really haven't.
It would have to be tackle in the first round to be
okay. I mean, if you're talking about sticking a 20 and taking Mims and then trading up for Frazier or Powers Johnson, I can see that.
Yeah,
but I almost think it has to be tackle first for the double.
Yeah.
Because I don't think, I'm not sure if any of those 4 guys, Paul, Morgan, Sumate, or Guyton, get anywhere near 51.
Yeah, at 51 at tackle, you're probably looking at Paul, maybe Amagaji. Those are probably the 2 guys that I think you're looking at 51.
Maybe Rosengarten.
That's probably early for him, but yeah, him and Fisher would be the next ones.
There's been talk of Rosengarten going in the first round to San Francisco, so it seems like he's much higher in the league than he is in the media. So I'm just going to assume he's in that grouping. Rosengarten at 51 is a little rich for my blood too, but I think I might like him the best out of those 3 options. So I wouldn't hate it.
I'm upset about these connection issues because I wanted to get on here and talk about how I put out a ranking of 50 wide receivers from this draft class.
Let's talk about it.
I said, you know what? I said, 10's not enough, 20's not enough, 30's not enough.
I want to know deeply why you ranked your 49th wide receiver ahead of your 50th. I want for tomorrow. We're going to go in detail why you think the 49th.
Tyrone Howells over Ryan O'Keefe. Okay.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I want to know. Tomorrow we're going to do that. I'm putting on a draft mailbag at SteelersNow.com tomorrow. And whatever questions I don't get to for that, I'm going to spill over here to the podcast, because once you ask the questions, they're mine and I can do whatever I want with them. And there's nothing any of you can do about it.
I love it. There we go. Nick, tell the people where they can find you.
You can find me on X, Twitter at Farabaugh FB. Make sure to read the stuff at SteelersNow.com. Hit the subscribe button. And, of course, as Smitty says, hit the notification bell to make sure that Smitty's Wi-Fi stays up throughout a show.
That's the only way. That's the only way.
Do we need a GoFundMe for Smitty to get better Wi-Fi? Is that where we need to be?
Literally, so we got new Wi-Fi in the last few months, and it has like Xfinity. There's like a gateway now, as opposed to just like a router. It's called a gateway, and it literally sits right next to me. Like it's right here. I can touch it, and I'm still having this type of trouble today.
It's not helping you.
It's very frustrating. Like Nick said, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, all that good stuff. Notification bell specifically because that way you guys know when a new video is posted. That's why that's so important. So good job, Nick. Love you. Remember that now. Alan, tell the people they can find you.
At @Saunders_PGH, PGH Steelers Now, SteelersNow.com. That's it.
We obviously appreciate the YouTube community, but if you are listening somewhere else as well, also leave us a 5-star review over there. Subscribe over there. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from. You can find me at Zachary Smith PGH on all social media platforms. We will be back tomorrow, but until then, thanks for jumping in and taking another ride with us on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.